Welcome to the Mycelium Signal podcast. As always, I'm your host Konstantin Tuonihovi. This is the inaugural episode of the new series, the Mycelium Forum, which will feature open-ended conversations with fellow occultists and artists. Please note, this episode was originally recorded for the Colorado-based Sol Nox Podcast, hosted by Karl Haikara, who has also visited this podcast earlier on. Please find a link to the Sol Nox Podcast at the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive straight into my discussion with Karl Haikara.
And that you started mentioning about how you're building what is it called, a necromantion in the pit, like basically a kind of
Yes.
Yeah, which that was like, oh, that's very interesting, and it kind of inspired everything to start off. So yeah, so I was kind of wanted to start off with that because that whole idea of creating something like that yourself, like this kind of underground ritual space, I think is very, very awesome to me, because to me that's very much like you're really like you're able to recapture that really chthonic primal type of magical practice, right? You know, it's like digging into the earth, creating this space in the earth that's like, I mean, to me that is very much a site that can lead to a lot of very profound experiences, I feel like, you know.
Definitely. I think that now the pit project is now over 9 years old. So I started it 9 years ago. And at one point, I felt that maybe I have reached to some kind of limit there. So I have the existing ritual sites, or the chapels, or however you wish to call them, sanctuaries, or that kind of like distinct sacred places, and already kind of dug out and fixed. And then I felt that I need to have some kind of, more demanding chthonic project akin to the original pit, which took a lot of work. It was very hard to dig the soil because there are constantly like a multitude of rocks and roots, and it's not digging some kind of more loose soil, but it's quite an ordeal. And originally, this idea, I believe, it came first in some kind of like a chthonic dream, which I have just told in the latest episode with Nas Alchemet. So if people are interested, I advise that they check out that episode out. It was called The Abyssal Door. And I then had this obsession that I need to have proper wholly underground ritual space. And then I was interviewing a Finnish colleague of mine, Harri Linnera, who is an author and a fellow occultist. In his interview in the Mycelium Signal podcast, he mentioned something about digging a necromantion, which is originally a Greek temple devoted to Hades and Persephone back in the day. And from that, I got this idea that I definitely need this kind of new space. I believe it was early April at the time this year, and I was examining the pit and looking for a good place, but I didn't find that. And then I just understood that behind the place called the Devil's Threshold, there was a junkyard of a demolished log cabin, which I had demolished around couple of maybe 5 years ago, and it was just like an empty space filled with wood debris and assorted junk. And then I just understood that this is the place, and it's directly at the border of our cottage plot. So it's still like in our territory, so to speak. And then I started to clean up the place at May, and it was a lot of work. At first, I cleansed and fixed the place to be an even ground, and then I started digging, and it was harder than ever before. And I quite soon got stuck with this huge rock, which seemed like it would be almost the bedrock, and I had to pause the digging, and I thought that this whatever rock is underneath here is so fucking large that it's impossible to move or even break by any means other than dynamite or like construction machine or something. And my friend then came over, who is quite a big guy, and with his help, we managed to move another rock which I thought was bigger than it actually was. And then I got like a new renewed energy that maybe I can actually dig to the around 4-6 meters of depth. Did just that, and after he left, I continued on my own. And from the late May, I think I have been constantly digging like many sessions per week for many, many hours, probably tens and tens of hours. And I have now reached the level of around 6 feet. And I originally had this idea that I need a kind of a roof for this place, so it would be totally like a cavern. But I'm still pondering if I are going to build a roof or not, because at the evening or in the darkness, it completely looks like it's submerged in darkness because it's literally underground. So it has been a lot of work, and I have finally reached the level and built assorted altars there, and my concept of the place has been more refined. So it's probably the most demanding chapel or temple of the pit thus far.
I think it's very appropriate that it's 6 feet deep because it's just, you know, the
Yes.
feet of a grave, which is very appropriate for the necromantian because it's there to be a channel, a conduit towards Hades and the dead and chthonic powers under the earth, right? So it's like I feel like yeah, with the roof thing, it's hard. It is kind of hard because I feel like with a roof, it'll give you even more that feeling like you're going into the earth, you know. But
Yes.
you don't necessarily need it for the blackness if you go out at night. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the thing you have to kind of weigh in your mind, right? Is you want it to feel more like delving into the earth, into this enclosed space, or not? Yeah.
Currently, it's more like an open grave, if you know what I mean. And it's weird that at first, kind of opposite ends of the place were quite narrow with the width of a real grave. So I understood that in the original Greek necromantians, they had some kind of like a maze-like construction, and there was a river flowing through the place, I think. It's just weird that I didn't know about the Greek necromantian before early this year. And when I started to study a bit about the subject, it was interesting how eerily or uncannily the place started to resemble at some points of the original necromantian in a sense. But I think the most magical and interesting aspect must be the presence of roots, and you can see kind of the different levels or sediments of the earth, in the sense that in the first, say, around 3 to 4 feet, it was basically full of rocks, and when I reached a certain level or a depth, there wasn't any rocks. I'd but just another, like, even larger rock that I couldn't even imagine, because the first rock I stumbled upon, I thought that it was like big, but it was still in the end movable. But then I understood that there is an even larger rock beneath, which is shaped like a tongue, and it must weigh around a ton of kilograms. That definitely is something. It is impossible to move, you know. So I finally found the kind of altar stone beneath all the debris and soil.
Yeah, it's interesting too that you felt compelled to dig right there, and then you found this stone kind of underneath is like the worked out. And I of course, like, for people who, not to get into like geology, but of course in Finland, the part, all that the rock layer and those big rocks were all probably carried there in the ice age, right? Like,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So yeah, there's a lot of, it's real wild. Some places where it's just like random rocks just like strewn around like in certain areas. It's just like, okay, like because the ice just left them there. Yeah.
It's definitely from that era, and I believe that because I have dug so deep, nobody has probably seen that rock for centuries, maybe in thousands of years, because that part of the place wasn't inhabited at all. I managed to dug so deep that I reached the actual bedrock. It was like an exhilarating moment in the sense that in my original dream, I found this kind of enclosed rocky area which had this small crevice, and I managed to squeeze through the crevice, and I found this like submarine like space beneath, and it was like carved from the bedrock itself. So I finally reached the bedrock. It was a magical moment because the bedrock wasn't even, it was like a wavy in structure. It really felt like I have finally reached the bottom. And I believe it's not wise to even try to use some kind of, they have this chemical which you can drill into the hole and it expands in the rock, which you can break large rocks. But I think I'm not going for that because it would be kind of, I don't know, blasphemous in a sense that if I would start to break the bedrock itself. I'm not creating a mine.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like creating a ritual space, best to leave certain things as they are.
Yes.
Like big trees and big rocks, and they're part of the land, part of what's there. Yeah, I mean, for all you know, you could be the first person to reach that rock ever.
Yeah, it's
So
it's quite possible.
the yeah, and I mean, for me, when you started talking about this, and I saw that some of the pictures that you posted of it so far, and I immediately was like, yeah, I could imagine the use of this kind of space or ritual, like because be a perfect place to do a kind of ritual where you go out and lay in it, staring up. And it's even actually works pretty good if it's like middle of night, pitch black, just staring up at the stars and just like allowing yourself to commune and suck down into like the chthonic forces. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's just a lot of usage for this type of virtual space.
Yes, like an incubation they used to do in the original Greek temples
Yeah.
to get the dreams and visions.
Yeah, because I can just imagine being in this kind of necromantion and yeah, literally like being able to do some type of ritual in there to commune with these certain types of forces, and then literally just like lay down and stare in the sky and go on a go connect with these things.
Yes.
There's a lot of uses like that you could definitely utilize for it, I believe.
Actually, it was interesting that I kind of did like a re-inauguration of the new altar on the Necromanteon, which is, I believe it was in the north side of the ritual space. And I did this kind of, how do you call it, like a wall of rocks. And the rocks kind of resemble skulls. And I also had some horns of a buck, and there was some candles and the mask of the pit. So I did like a new altar there, and I kind of it was reaching midnight, and I had assembled the altar beforehand and all the candles and whatnot, you know, and I went back to the cottage and to wait. When it was around 11:30 or something p.m., I returned to the place and I started slowly to light up the candles. And there, I did a small right there. And I remember when I was descending the steps, because I had actually dug out literal steps to the Necromanteon. So you descend to there. I think it was a good idea at the time.
Yeah,
And
it's a good idea.
when it was still completely submerged in the dark, I kind of felt this a bit of cold shivers. It was kind of foreboding, even though I'm quite used to being at the pit at night. But because of it was so new of a place. It is the kind of atmosphere, or some people might even say the energy of the place was a bit like a question mark. And when I descended there, I felt, literally like descending into a catabasis, or into a grave. And after I had lit up the candles and I saw the place in a new light, no pun intended, it really felt almost homely. And I felt that I wasn't there alone. I mean, in some places, the genius loci of the place, the spirit of the place, may be quite hostile and alienating, or stark, or somehow uninviting. It lacks something, or there's this kind of distracting energy. I don't know. But anyhow, it was really good experience to be there. And then I did a small ride where I just said my greetings and regards to the dead, because the place is directly an homage to the dead relatives, my dead dogs, dead friends. And I have this plan that there is this soil wall over there, which is quite large. So I intend to burrow some kind of holes, or memorial places, or little altars, store different artifacts which resemble the dead, like directly the dead. And I actually have the grave lantern from my grandparents' grave. It's at the Necromanteon currently, and it has been residing at the pit for many years now. And I originally saved it from their actual grave, because it was going to be due to go to the trash, because it was already so rusted and almost broken. So I saved it for another life at the pit.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I feel like the thing is that in this case, you had some type of vision, something sent you this dream, something inspired, something. The whole Janus Loci of the place, I think, led you to creating the place. If that makes sense. So it would make
Yes.
sense that you're not feeling a sense of hostility or anything creating it. It's because it's something that called you to create it. If that makes sense, like that. That's kind of my reading on that.
The whole pit, for the most part, has been like a cooperation with the local nature and the history of the place. At sometimes I feel like I'm the janitor of the place, or caretaker, or facilitator, or whatever. I'm not some kind of dictator of the place at all, and it's all done in harmony with the local genius loci. You know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one thing that I don't know if you ever read Nocturnicon by Konstantinos, but
No, but I remember the guy from 20 years ago. I didn't read the book, but I maybe read some articles by him in the early 2000s.
yeah, I mean, um, he started off as like a ritual magician. He released like some book summoning spirits, which is a really good kind of primer on evocation, and he did some stuff about communicating with ghosts and protecting yourself from psychic vampires. And then Levlin decided to ask him to do, like some type of dark Wicca thing. So he did that Nocturnal Witchcraft book. But then Nocturnicon was really, I think, him just being like going all out and like, yeah, this is really what I'm about. And and to me to be able to stay, it was probably one of the most inspiring books for me as a teenager reading, and led me on a lot of different things, because in this book he talks about Kenneth Grant. He talks about the Fraternitas Saturni and Godos and all kinds of stuff. And the whole thing with Nocturnicon is this idea of essentially he calls it like void magic. So it's basically like placing your completely, he pretty much completely gets rid of all traditional magical tools. And then it's about directly accessing this basically nocturnal, but it has to be very dark. I mean, yourself sinking into the earth as a grave, and then you see these types of energies like flowing above you, and then you inhale this kind of, you literally inhale this nocturnal like ether, basically, you know, and that's how that's how he starts the whole thing. That's what you do to prep, basically, and then once you've inhaled this nocturnal energy, so to say, throughout your whole body, then you get up and just randomly, whatever direction is, then you go and start building a circle. But it's not, it's like really, he's like wanting you to put yourself in this place where you're in the center of the void. So there is no north, east, west, or south. It's just like, it has you kind of create like this kind of like bubble, and an energetic bubble in the void, and that's where you do your magic for the system in the book. But this initial kind of right to get yourself into the zone is something that I use to this day. I've used it for 20 years because it's very, very effective. Because because also like it's the idea of drawing in this nocturnal energy, and everything, this kind of night side energy, but yeah. So like to me, this idea of like laying in a ritual space that's resembling a grave, doing something like this, drawing in this energy, would be even more powerful to me, and yeah, I don't know. The thing about that whole thing is that it's very effective for me. Like literally, if I do that in the dark and I do this kind of practice that he has in it, I literally can feel you can feel your kind of energetic body like vibrating around your whole body, like when I do this. And maybe that's because I'm very like night side energy person, so literally doing this is very energizing for me, right? But it's very effective. And it's kind of crazy that this book was released on Lethlin. You could get it anywhere, but it's actually like pretty much a intro manual for anybody wanting to get into the kind of night side magic.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. Many thoughts spring to my mind, but one I think pertinent subject could be that what makes a place sacred? What is in the so-called DNA of the sacred? I mean, you just refer to this specific ritual, and I would imagine that, and that this is just a joke in order to people to understand what I'm getting at, is that if you would have had an TV blaring in the background, it would have definitely probably hindered the power of the ritual. So I personally think that holy or sacred is something which is set aside. It's less, not more. I mean, because nowadays people have so much distractions, and they are always in some kind of like a trance. They are quite never left alone with their own devices, and they don't probably even know who they even are behind the mask, because they don't probably understand that they are wearing a mask. So I think these kind of practices would be quite interesting for anybody, even for those people who don't have any relation or interested in the magic or occult or the esoteric, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that it's very good for somebody to, like connect with these things, something that's beyond them, like, and yeah, like you said, a big thing with something like this work that Konstantinos has, like in his book, it's all about turning everything off, going into pitch black, basically. You want to be in this kind of void state, right? You want to be in this place that's, and it can be, but the thing is that with his work is that if that book in particular is about, you could do this magic anywhere, but you need to find a space that's dark,
Yes,
like,
but
Any place can become the sacred one, but you have to be in this darkness and connect yourself with this kind of eternal void, eternal chthonic void energy that's out there, and by doing that, you make the place you make a place sacred. So you could do it anywhere, but of course, even in his book, he recommends if you can do this like outside or in a nice location that adds to the atmosphere is always better.
I think this is quite related to the sensory deprivation tank style in the sense that by depriving yourself of external stimuli and the lights and whatever, which is kind of reminding you of the chronos time, in the sense you are creating a kind of personal capsule, maybe of kairos time, which is basically kind of like a sacred time. For example, if you think the concept of the liminal, say if you are in some movie theater during the evening and it's full of people are laughing and eating popcorn and whatever, and there's some quite stupid like romantic comedy playing on and people are having like a good time, so to some people it sounds cozy, it sounds insufferable to me, but hey, that's just me. But if you think the same space which is completely vulgar at that point, imagine the place at 4 a.m. when you are alone and the whole fucking shopping mall is completely devoid of people, then it turns into something else. And I would even imagine that you could conduct that kind of ritual there without all the other people,
Yeah.
So it's not the place; it's basically like the time, and it's not. I don't think we should be too quick to kind of judge different places. It's like basically, I think the people are always the problem, and maybe we are problems to ourselves at some time, and we need this kind of guiding blocks or some kind of devices which help us to get into the proper mood. But just how it is.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I think that any place can be a place to connect with the numinous in a way, right? Like if in this, or not necessarily the numinous, but the uncanny, the liminal. Yeah, I mean, you can. And there's people who can even, you can even have experiences in a very sitting in the middle of a mall, and there's tons of people around, and all of a sudden something you can have an uncanny experience. This.
Yes.
So I think it depends on a lot of factors. Like I do think that to a certain extent, on this spiritual path, I think part of what I think is that we should strive to be so connected with this level of reality that even when we're in a middle of a crowded shopping mall, we're still connected to it in some way. They're not divided from the liminal, like in that sense. But I think that then when you go to a place that is very strong with that energy, if you go to an abandoned building in the middle of the night, or your pit, which is hallowed and sacred and set aside to the liminal forces, then it's going to be even more strong experience for you. But I think the goal would be to like develop yourself and connect yourself so strongly to these forces that you can have an uncanny experience even in the middle of a crowded shopping mall or something.
Definitely, I have tried meditating on like a busy railway station. It's kind of not the bad part of the city, but it's like it's known to have lots of like nasty crowd inhabiting the place because they don't have anywhere else to go. So there's always some kind of an element of disturbance. So I have tried that, and it was interesting moment to kind of be mindful of my possessions so nobody wouldn't nick my wallet or whatever like stuff when I was meditating. So I had to keep my other eye open or something like that. But it was still an interesting challenge. And I would advise that people try this kind of thing, because if one always demands to have a perfect setting for the magic or the ritual, there is no resistance training.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess I got this idea very early on because of, as I was a teenager, my background was primarily being into Zen Buddhism and Aikido and martial arts and stuff, and that did have a big influence on as I got more into magic and Satanism and the occult and runes and all this kinds of stuff and pagan practices. Once I really got more seriously into that, and I kind of turned away from the more Buddhist side of things, I did still retain some of these aspects of particularly Zen Buddhism. And one of those things is that they talk about being able to meditate doing at any time, doing whatever, so, and that's something that I do. Like, one of my old jobs I was one of the managers, but I used to go back and just do the dishes because I was the fastest at it, because I wanted to get us out of there. So, and that was kind of my attitude. I go back there and I do the dishes, and I kind of go in this weird trance state and get it done, and then do next thing. Like, I think that I do think that that's a very very good thing to do. I mean, in the past when I used to take public transportation, I had some really profound spiritual experiences in a bus. Just I put on some black metal and stared out the window and just went inwards. You know what I mean? And had these these inner kind of experiences. All the time. Like, so I think any moment can be a profound experience. It's just a matter of choosing to. A lot of people.
Yeah.
One thing I always challenge everybody to do, and it's something I challenge myself to do as well, is like, in today's day and age, you have a moment where you're kind of like waiting for something. You're gonna, we all pretty much like immediately go to our phone and scroll, and
Yes.
and I think one thing that I challenge everybody to do, and myself included, is instead of just immediately going to your phone, instead just be still with yourself and your thoughts and the world around you. Actually, like, engage with the world around you and your own internal thoughts, and I think that that's a very that's actually a very profound, very simple but very profound thing to do, because you're challenging yourself, because we're all used to just this constant like, oh, I'm like waiting, I'm gonna like doom scroll my phone.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
if you're like, if you really just go, no, don't do that, just sit here, be patient, like, entertain yourself in your own mind, like, and you can do it. It really does create a lot more internal discipline, I think.
Yes, I think in relation to meditation, if you think it in a kind of like a tactical way, in the sense that I used to do these public speaking gigs for small audiences back in the day. And of course, those are like mentally quite demanding. You know, you have to be at your top game, so to speak. And I used to have like a 15 minutes meditations at my car at the parking lot with the doors locked, of course. Just right before I went to do the public speaking gigs. And it really helped me to kind of detach myself from the work day before that, and kind of create this sacred space for to myself to be without the masks. And those sessions really helped. And I think that if you kind of pause the chronos time for a moment, you can think in advance in those empty moments when people usually browse their phone. You can think that what you need to do next, and it can kind of give you this upper hand to people who are basically acting like zombies in the grocery stores, which is quite evident nowadays. That if you just observe people, they are in a trance. Their kind of situational awareness is quite bad. And I think any kind of detachment from the chronos time is very healthy for anybody.
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of being in the moment, being in reality, the world around you, is very important, and one thing I always say too for people involved with the left hand path and these types of things is that, um, you're not going to be able to really. I'm not sure if the right word is take advantage of, but you're not really going to be able to take advantage of to interact with, grasp hold of the experiences that are led our way on this path, the intuitions that you have to follow on this path. If you're kind of like keeping everything muffled under the constant static of social media and a bunch of horse shit, like uh if you're out in the world and I feel like the way that things really communicate with us on this path is through intuition. So the only way to feel your intuition is to be self-aware, look into yourself and go, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Okay, so I follow this intuition. Generally, if you follow your intuition, you're led where you should be going. I can't tell you if you listen to people who are very successful at something or kind of fell into the path that they're on. So many of them, it was intuition. They just got this gut feeling, oh, I need to go do this, and they just followed it. And next thing you know, they're fucking like, making movies in Hollywood or some shit. Like this just, I think that this is definitely something that people in the past did more because they had less distractions. If you think about
Yes.
even 20 years ago, or particularly 30, 40 years ago, 80s, even back to the 80s and 90s, we all had to follow our intuition a lot more. You know what I mean?
I definitely think so. And it's like, I think intuition is communicating directly with your unconscious mind. And I think the more you do that, the more you kind of observe things and the less you kind of inject in your mind and brains all the unwanted, all the unneeded stuff. For example, yellow press news, social media, whatever, like gossip, rumors, and whatnot. The human games. And I personally stopped following almost any news around, maybe I think it was 10 years ago. I'm now 46 years old, and I stopped watching TV around when I was less than 15 years old. So it has been decades since I last watched any kind of like a broadcast TV. And I think since I stopped consuming the news, it really helped me to kind of understand the big picture, in the sense that, for example, I can give a good example from around maybe 6 years ago, when something finally clicked in my brains. Of course, there was all kinds of different practices involved too, but I had really kind of managed to break free from this, like you said, the doom scrolling and whatnot. So I was in this local grocery store doing very mundane business of just fucking shopping some groceries. And when I was picking up some frozen goods from the shop, I just looked around and I saw the people who were like walking by, and they didn't suddenly feel like some kind of NPCs, like non-playable characters in a game, like something which are totally irrelevant. But I noticed different details I didn't notice before, because those people obviously don't mean nothing to me, because I'm not probably going to see them ever again. But I just started to think that, oh, this is like a middle-aged woman, and I just started to think what might be her profession, and what's her life, what she is really like. And that guy, older guy over there, what kind of life he has had. I started to get a more nuanced view on this, like actual persons behind the social masks. And then when I was at the counter and there was this lady who was working the counter there, I almost was moved in a weird emotional way, in the sense that I understood that everybody has their own problems and secret worries and like hopes and these kind of things. I started almost to see in a Jungian way the archetypes these people presented, and it was like almost a psychedelic experience, even though I was completely sober at the time. And when I got out of the shop, I had to like take a breath, because it was so compelling and so moving of an experience. And it felt like after that experience, it was even harder to immediately kind of like judge people and think that, lump people, masses of people together. Even though I'm quite a misanthrope, still it was like a kind of a good effect from not messing up my own mind with news and unwanted stuff. It was easier to see like what was beneath the shroud and beneath seemingly, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, it's almost like somehow like you just kind of went and, like I said, you're in a grocery store, you're walking around, and all of a sudden you like get into some state where you're psychically like fucking linking up with people against your will, kind of. You know what I mean? Like that's something
Yes.
that happens sometimes. Yeah, it can just kind of go out of, get weird, and you're just like, fuck, like. Yeah, I think that, but I do think it's important. I think that the thing is like, yeah, like, I'm definitely a misanthropic person, but the weird thing is that I don't really try not to judge people based off of whatever, you're I judge people based off of my feeling about them. Like when I meet
Yeah.
them. You know what I mean? Like I usually get a feeling about people, I'm like, okay, I'll meet somebody and be like, get a very intuitive. I trust my intuition. Intuition for people be like, yeah, I like this person and I are gonna be good friends. Like
Yeah.
it's usually immediate. Like we usually just hit it off. Like it just goes from there. That's kind of even my attitude of girlfriends. Like I'm not the type of person who's gonna like work at trying to convince somebody to date me. I feel like it should be this kind of immediate, this kind of natural thing, right? Like both people should feel it. Like it should be something that's there. Um, and then there's other people that I meet that I'm like neutral about. Like,
Yeah.
and that's generally a lot of the kind of what I guess some people would call NPC types, where they're very much like involved with. They're kind of the medium people. They're part of whatever the cultural thing is that's going on.
Yeah.
They don't. A lot of them don't necessarily have strong identities of their own, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you get surprised. You meet somebody that you judge to be this, and then they turn out to be something else. So that's why it's always
Yeah.
important to not judge, but I just kind of go by my intuition on a person by person basis, really. And I do think that the vast majority of humanity is obviously fucking this obviously a waste of resources, because you can see what they do in the world, but
Yeah.
at the same time I also judge everybody on a one-to-one level. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like, I have to admit that I can tell you how many times I've gone grocery shopping, for example, and felt like a ghost wandering among these people, or like the only person in a world of ghosts. Like these people are all ghosts wandering around. Like there's just those
Yeah.
times where you really feel like I have felt so disconnected from all these people that they don't even seem like really all that real to me.
Yeah, it's like a rift. I actually wrote something to you a couple of days ago in preparation for this episode. This is from almost like from my diary. I thought that I jokingly said that I'm having a late midlife existential crisis. I said that it has become apparent that I'm no longer fit for city life. For example, the last few years practically living at the cottage were the last straw. I find it almost excruciatingly dull and painful to participate in the basic aspects of the so-called consensus reality. So there you have it. And I have to quote Kyle Rasmussen from the band Ritual, whom I interviewed a month ago. He had this line or saying that you're much worse than you think you are. We all are. So if somebody would to be too pleased him or herself. We must always remember that we all carry a shadow, whether we know it or not.
Yeah, none of us are perfect. I think that's the thing. Like we all, yeah, it's very easy to imagine you are, and yeah, I was going off of what you just said too. Like, do you feel like the whole operation, because you've been building the pit for what, 9 years now, and
Yeah.
then really engaging in this kind of very like physical connective way with this kind of chthonic current of horror, do you feel like, how do you feel like that's changed you over those years? Where do you feel like you are? Because it's 9 years, you said. So 9 years, I mean, that's definitely I see a lot of spiritual development in 9 year increments. That's been my experience. So like, where do you feel like you're? I feel like I feel like you're probably on the cusp right now of a new 9 year cycle of transformation.
That might very well be. So here's concise history of the pit at my work there. So basically, I have, of course, told this story many times before, but let me keep it very brief. Let me start not from the beginning of the pit, but something which happened because of the pit. It was probably around 5 years ago, and I was digging up the old ground cellar, which was completely submerged with debris at the time, and it was impossible to descend to the ground cellar because the roof had collapsed. So basically, I was tidying up the place and digging it out, and it was a lot of straining work. It felt like a madman's work because it was so straining. And I was listening to somebody. I actually think it was Jordan Peterson of all people, and it was his biblical lecture or something, and he said something about the middle age for men specifically, and he said that if you don't have a kind of magnum opus at when you're turning middle in the middle age for the last part of your life, and nobody knows how long the last part of your life will be. For some people, it isn't like 40 or 30 or 50 years. It might be less or it might be more. Nobody knows. So basically, I was thinking that because I don't have any children and they weren't not in the horizon, so to speak, that I and my wife weren't going to have any children. And Jordan Peterson said that that is the most usual way to kind of ground the later part of your life, to have children, to do what everybody else has been doing for the mankind's duration thus far. And he said that if you're not going to do that, he said that think long and hard what you are going to do with the remaining part of your life. What kind of meaning would you kind of garner from where? And he said that it's not impossible, but it's more difficult. And at that moment, it really struck me that I have done everything in my life, like basically in some kind of antinomian way, in the sense that where most people have gone to the right, I have gone to the left, and the other way around in my life. I have taken weird turns. And at that moment, I felt like I was too submerged with my work, and I had become to lose my identity as an artist and initiate and the occultist too because of my work. And then I just understood that I fucking need to do something now. This is it. I'm at the crossroads. And then I envisioned that the pit, which was then around maybe 4 to 5 years old, I felt like I need to do like a kind of grand ritual at the pit to make a kind of this grand ceremony where I would be born again, lose the mask of work, and which was slowly killing me. And I then organized something which is called the Catabasis One, right? And it had like 5 to 6 other people at the pit, like selected people, including my wife. And we had this church, this large tent, which is basically, I think they use those in Siberia. I devised this ritual at the pit where I kind of vote that I will change my life around and I will return to use my artist name Konstantin Tuonihovi, which I go by nowadays again, which I got in a vision around more than 20 years ago. And that's something I did. And after the next year, my life started to turn again into a different direction. And everything I vowed I did. And I have since produced the most meaningful and strongest art I have ever done in my life. I co-founded the artist collective Tuonen Portti, and I formed the Mycelium Signal podcast, which has something I have been thinking for many, many years now. And I feel that I kind of finally encapsulated and made manifest this vision I had maybe around 25 years now, which I then called the Nexus Project, which would be kind of like all encompassing artistic and magical project, which would make use all of my artistic and whatever skills. And it would be this kind of maybe a collective which would span worldwide. And if you think the Mycelium Signal podcast and everything I have been doing for the last 5 years, I think I have finally have begun building my magnum opus, which is including the pit, you know. And this is absolutely exhilarating in the sense that I can easily see that if I wouldn't have held this ride like 5 years ago at December at the pit with those people at the time, I can easily see that I would be in a very, very bad place now.
Yeah. I mean, it's very important sometimes to do these types of rituals these initiatory rituals, which, particularly, at the start of a path to do an initiation ritual. And then even as you're going through it, it's always necessary to dedicate yourself to the path, to what you'd want to do. And I think it's very powerful and profound to do something like this. And do you feel like creating the space, creating the pit, do you think that creating this very physical representation of your past and a literal like living nexion to the kind of forces which you interact with, do you feel like that's had also a strong impact on this kind of transformation and also like I guess you feel like that's increased like your connection to these forces, even throughout your regular day,
Definitely. It's like I practically moved to the cottage 3 to 4 years ago, and it had been something I had been planning on to do, to, spend time alone at the cottage. But I had somehow never done that before that. And it was like in my so called occult bucket list, and I finally did it. And it was harrowing at first because I really confronted all kinds of very weird and stark sides of my own psyche. It was like a direct catabasis and like very stark individuation process. It really it was like acceleration. And if you think last 9 years at the pit, I have seen many changes in my own psyche, and the one which I find very I like this very much is that the some kind of pirate like antinomian aspect of the pit, because if you think it in a layman's terms and if you think it through the eyes of like completely ordinary people who don't have any understanding of what we are speaking about at the moment, he would think that this fucking guy is absolutely fucking crazy. Who will use tens and tens of hours of risking their back and physique at the pit because there have been like quite a great fires and moving big rocks, and it's just a fucking miracle that I haven't actually breaking anything in my body during the whole 9 years. And it's also like great middle finger to the consensus reality, because through this project, this enantiodromia, if you liken it to that, like I spoke with Nas, I think it's also, I have molded it and it has molded me in the sense. And if you even think mold in the sense of mycelium and chthonic, I have been subjected to so much mycelium and the dirt and the soil and the elements that I believe I'm no longer, jokingly said, I'm no longer like ordinary person in the sense that who knows what kind of weird stuff is now inhabiting my DNA. And I say this jokingly because it's like I have inhaled so much spores at those places. And I'm also thinking that at times I should have perhaps been more careful, because just inhaling fumes of burning material and whatever, I haven't kind of been too wary of that kind of thing. And I think it's also like a good memento mori in the sense that I remember one case where I was digging a grave like part of the original pit, and it was becoming dark. It was almost midnight or something, and my headlamp batteries were waning off. I didn't fucking see almost anything. My shovel almost broke, I think, and I continued digging with my bare hands, and I was so completely exhausted, and so I just collapsed into the dirt and the soil. For some moment I felt like I can't have any breath because I was out of breath, and I was, almost submerged with the soil. And I felt like this is a good moment to die,
Yeah.
these kind of things. When I returned to the city, when I have spent prolonged periods at the pit, my wife just has to remind me at times that if I kind of, take some liberties with this consensus reality demands, and I'm not speaking about breaking laws, obviously, but it's like people who live in the city they're too obedient. For example, if I need to go somewhere, I can usually almost always find a shortcut there. I'm not that obedient to the laws of consensus reality. I think it has brought up some kind of like animalistic side in me, in the sense that I get more easily into ecstatic states of mind now. And it feels like I have this pirate energy, so to speak. And in contrast, it feels like most people who are living in the city are too, like I said, obedient, exhibiting some kind of slave morality. If
Yeah.
I want to get some Nietzsche,
Do you feel like, so I haven't been to Finland obviously, but I have been to Sweden and Norway, and known people from all three countries. I do think that there is a very strong conformity thing in Scandinavia where people are like very much, there's a lot of egalitarianism where they think everybody should be the same level, and
Yes.
a lot of conformity where people are raised, to all like dress a certain way and act a certain way. That's the proper way, and that's kind of like very, very prevalent there. Correct? Like I don't know if it's still like that, but I know in the definitely when I was there in the past, like it seemed like that, and so it seemed like to me that once I visited there, I understood better why black metal was so shocking to, those countries, because it was like you have these guys who are like, fuck that, we're gonna like completely like rebel against all these egalitarian, conformist type of viewpoints that's so dominant in the culture there, right? So
Yes, I think especially in Norway, that was the original black metal scene was so strong of the second wave. And I think it's quite the same in Finland, in the sense that the ordinary city folk are well behaved and, obedient in the sense. But I think there is a marked contrast if you ever visit Lapland, and those people who don't have like a police at hand, so to speak, that if somebody would call the police, it might take them fucking an hour to come by. So they are more self-reliant, and I think the Lapis people exhibit this kind of healthy pioneer type of energy. I remember last time I visited the place, I took part in this reindeer selection it's like an annual event, and I really liked the hardy style of those people. And people living in the city kind of lose that. And of course, I was born in the city, but the last 9 years at the city has kind of made me like in a good way, like a hick, if you catch my drift, in the sense that I might feel a bit crass when I, return from the pit, in the sense that I sometimes call myself the bit gaffer or the bit guy or the bit, man, in the sense that I'm not like a wholly civilized person, and I like it very fucking much because it really gives me this sense of liberty from the shackles of this goddamn consensus reality, which I so hate.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's actually more in keeping, anyways, with probably pre-Christian Finnish culture and Scandinavian culture. Like I don't think
Yeah,
that being like these,
that's the
like,
growth.
being these, conformists, like subservient, like everybody follows the rules and nobody can be too much bigger than the other people. I mean, that it seems like very much like a very Christian mindset that was kind of, enforced upon Scandinavians, and they just kind of went with it, like, and now it's
Yes.
like, now it's just like what's normal to them, I guess. And, I think that, uh, I think that digging down, connecting the roots to the literal earth of where you're from is very much going to help you connect with that side of things. And one thing that I was thinking about earlier, that I remember, like, when I was a kid, my friends and I would go out and dig fucking pits and shit all the time just for the hell of it. Like, that was like,
Yeah.
there's an aspect to doing what you're doing that is connecting to that childlike wonder, childlike sense of play, it's connecting to that childhood level where you do these things on an instinctual level. And, like, I think there's a lot of people who just don't get it because they feel like everything needs to have some type of, like, purpose that they can look at, or they don't even, the idea of, like, doing something physical like that is not something they want to do or whatever. But I think it's like, yeah, I mean, to me, it very much reminds me of this, almost this sense of just really like letting go of all of that type of stuff, and letting go of all the sensors that we have in our mind, and just going out there and digging and following your intuition and doing what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I live quite near of my childhood home at the moment, and or have been living for 25 years. All the surroundings are quite familiar to me. And there's this small, very small little forest half a mile from here. And I used to build these huts. All the Finnish guys used to play in the woods and make these kind of makeshift huts. This kind of like a buscraft huts
Yeah,
with all the material you can get from the forest, and
yeah,
do
I
not
did
even
that
use
too.
any tools. Yeah,
Yeah, I've done
and
that too. Yeah.
I was in the nearby forest and with a couple of my friends, and we had like a good hut going on. And then my friends felt hungry or something, and they had this feeding time at their homes, and they were obedient. They went back to the place, and because it was normal and there was something interesting going in the TV. I was alone at the hut, and I was just so obsessed by building them that I wouldn't want to even eat or watch any TV. And then my mother had to venture into the forest and yell my name so that I would return from the hut. But I was silent in the hut, and she always had to practically drag me out of there because I was so much interested more in making my own spaces. And I still remember that. At the cottage, which is right next to the pit, there's this attic, and it's quite small and narrow, and it was a quite a eerie place when I was a child. But somehow I was always kind of drawn to the place, and I spent like godless amounts of hours in the attic, and I always tried to kind of create this kind of movie style spaces, even though I didn't know anything about magic and rituals, but I have always had this weird, uncanny or macabre sense of making spaces. And I remember spending nights there with my friends back in the day because it was so exciting and scary. And at one point, when I was around 12 or 10, I believe, we had this old travel TV, portable TV. And there was this Omen, the old movie about the Antichrist, the
Yeah.
original one, was playing. And I somehow managed to get a pass to have the TV and go to the sauna cottage alone with the TV to watch fucking horror movies at 9 o'clock in the evening. And
Yeah.
I was probably traumatized by the movies, but I couldn't help it. I was so obsessed by horror fiction at the time. And I think all of these things I'm doing now, I already did as a child. And I had the most strongest drive from all of my friends to do this kind of things. It was never an option for me. I got into trouble in the elementary school in the first, I believe it was first or second class, when I was throwing some weird shit in the papers instead of actually studying something like the obedient schoolmates. And I drove something about vampires and werewolves, and I even created stories about where I was the vampire myself, and that really didn't work well with the teachers. I really got into trouble by that, and it's like I'm an aspiring horror writer myself. I have lots of like unpublished stories at the moment still, and nothing has actually changed. It's just that I have better tools, better skills, and whole network of like-minded, liminal obsessed friends and colleagues now, and it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say that I think that this kind of path is something you're born this way. And I
Yes.
was talking to this about Cathonia actually just last night, where I was messaging with her, and now it came up and was like, no, like fucking, we all are born this way because like she was saying that her family, she was the only one who's like that. You know what I mean? Like, and her
Yeah.
family's super Christian, but then she's just the one odd, person who's like this. And I was like, yeah, I mean, to me, that just is another example of we who are on this kind of path, the kind of dark antinomian left-hand path, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're just born this way, Like, as long as I can remember, I was fascinated by horror and the dark and all of this stuff, and I think that I think it's just it's baked into us in a way, you know what I mean?
It definitely is, and I think this is a good leeway into something you wanted to talk in this episode, which is the spectral resonance concept by the Canadian horror author and esotericist Richard Gavin, which we have both interviewed before. And I just read his essay or a text, and I think it was in the book The Moribund Portal, Spectral Resonance and the Numen of the Gallows by Three Hands Press, published in 2018, I believe.
Yeah,
And I just read it again because at some point, I believe I had one weird concept, and I was trying to formulate it, and I told about this to Richard, maybe because you had told me about the spectral resonance, perhaps, and Richard just sent me this text of his, and I think this is maybe something we all have been kind of, yearning and seeking from the day one. I mean, I like me in the attic when I was a child, and currently at the pit and whatever. It's this weird spectral resonance, And would you want to introduce this subject better to the audience, or should I do it myself?
yeah, I can give my kind of understanding.
Yes.
Yeah, like you said, it's from Orban Portal, which is basically like a monograph, essentially. It's a 100-something page essay essentially about this topic, and it's great. I've read it a couple of times. I've just been rereading it recently, which is probably part of why it's on my mind. But basically, the idea of the spectral resonance, and in accordance with the idea of Morban Gallows or Morban portal is the book is about the gallows as a crossroad space, a liminal space where the other world and this world connect into one, essentially, which is what creates a sense of spectral resonance. So, essentially, it's building on his ideas of sacred horror and everything else. It's just another piece in that this concept that ties very much into the benighted past and the monstrous soul and all this stuff. Like, but it's kind of a it's both an internal process of I guess connecting yourself with the other world, you could say, the spirit world, and and also is something that can be found in places. So it's definitely connected to genus loci, because a place can have a spectral resonance, which is kind of why he gets into the idea of the gallows, which is usually at a crossroads, which is usually always seen as this place of, numinous, terrible power. And that's where you find the spectral resonance. And I think one thing that he talks about in there is transforming the self so that we resonate with the spectral force even more.
Yes.
So that's the internal transformation. So that's why it's called a resonance. So it's something that resonates, that has this force, this vibration, you could say, and on this kind of benighted path, you can transform yourself to become more attuned to the spectral resonance of the other world, which I do believe very much. It's almost it's very related to something we were just talking about earlier. So
yeah, I think it's also related to the objects or some kind of sacred artifacts too, and it's maybe like you are kind of honing yourself to be a better transceiver to this kind of resonance. And this is quite interesting. I think it's related to the liminal in the sense that, like we just discussed, a place can have if you think it can have the day side, ordinary mask, and when the mask is peeled off, say the movie theater at night becomes a liminal place. Even a gas station at night can be a liminal space.
Yeah.
So it's I believe it's everywhere. Like Richard himself said, I believe that the world is actually a haunted place. You just need to sense it. And I think
exactly, yeah.
If people live in the city, the consensus reality is a kind of maybe an anti-spectral resonance in itself, in the sense that it's an echo chamber. It is kind of a like metaphysical safe space for this kind of paradigm we have at the moment, which is pretty scientific, not scientific, but scientific, as in science as a religion in a crass way, which we have told numerous times before, I believe. But I think if you just somehow divorce yourself from the safe space of consensus reality, the world quickly becomes the haunted place. For example, in the nature, it's quite rare that normally city folk have any experience with the total wild nature, And I believe even some kind of danger element is somehow fruitful for true liminal experience, in the sense that it keeps you alert. For example, if you have a panic, I think Richard himself also said that if you are in a panic, like the god Pan, you sense that the world is truly alive.
Yeah, that's part of the idea of Pan. And these types of, ties back into sacred horror and all these ideas. And
yes,
one thing I always think too, though, is that, like I was saying earlier, all places, like you just said, can be spectral, can be haunted. And I think that if you live in a city, you can still connect to this. You just have to, when I used to live in the city, I used to have to walk to work, say in the morning. I would have to walk in the downtown 4 a.m. You know what I mean? And I guarantee you, if you're wandering through the city at 4 a.m, it's going to be a whole different experience, right? Suddenly, again, that mask of energy of all these people is gone, and there's this kind of absence, and that absence creates a presence, which is something that I think, which is it allows the other to manifest. You know what I mean? Like the mask is the human mask is taken off, but now the human is this absence. The other can intrude into it. So then if you're wandering down the street at 3:30 in the morning or something, right? Like it's a whole different experience. Suddenly everything is haunted. It can be and that can even people who are very, very attached to dayside reality will feel this way, if not feel. So I think it's like all places can be this way. I always say you can connect with nature anywhere. You can connect with these things anywhere. You just have to know how.
Actually, this came to mind that if you think about haunted, it means like somebody or something is like frequenting a place. It's like it's almost like inhabited by something. And in this case, it's not. It's immaterial. It's not. No, it's not human. It's the other. But if you think that if people feel this haunted, maybe they are kind of like haunted in the sense that they are being hunted like animals or like being a prey, and normal people don't get to have this prey vibe, so to speak, too often at all, because everything is so safe in consensus reality. But I think it's a good you know experience and exercise to feel haunted, in the sense that there is this threat that you are subjected to something you can't control. It kind of as in the experience of sacred horror, it kind of gets you alert, and it gets you cognizant of different energies, and which are not like something you usually sense in the so-called consensus reality.
Yeah, and I think that's why that kind of, I guess, this creating this fear within the self is something. That's why, that's something Richard Gavin talks about, even in Konstantinos, which I brought up earlier, when he talks about doing this, right? You really want to put yourself in a position where you really feel like you're going in this grave, and these fucking spirits that turn into vapor that you inhale mixes, and he wants you to feel like, to make it so real in your mind and connect with it so much that you almost feel like a sense of fear a little bit when you get up. Like this is using dread and fear on stuff as fuel for your spiritual practice is very much effective, and it's very, I think it's almost essential to this type of spiritual practice.
I believe in the days of past, I mean, in the distant past, I believe this element of fear with when doing this kind of ritual work or whatever was more prevalent. And I think this weird safe space type of thinking of you can usually see in the New Age scene, which is like everything about the so-called spirit world, or the other is benevolent, and there's this quite dualistic idea. And then again, in some circles, perhaps in some Christian circles, there is this notion that perhaps that the spirit world, or whatever you wish to call it, is evil, or something to
Yeah.
do not have any interactions with that because it's dangerous, this Satan worshipping scares and whatnot. But it's like, how about if there is such a thing and we don't even know what the hell it is? I just believe that there is something, but it's like the other. It's very hard to pinpoint, and it's very hard to explain. I just have experiences that there is something, but maybe it's not at all what people usually think, and maybe it's wholly non-dualistic in the sense. And I just have a big problem with this kind of dualistic thinking, which doesn't account that the real nature of the other. And I just basically mean that the fear aspect, it's humiliating, and it's like in the psychedelics, they can really bring you down in your knees, even though you think that you're like a burly middle-aged guy and you're like a good fighter and this kind of stuff. You don't just understand that there are things in the psychedelic experience or encountering the true liminal or the numinals that they will absolutely break your knees, and you don't have any kind of faculties to deal with that kind of stuff. And I believe you just have to experience those kind of things to truly understand that they really are not to be messed with. And I think it's a good, even evolutionary psychologically wise, I think it's a good idea to understand that those kind of hierarchies move up and down in the sense that there will always be people who are beneath you. You are probably stronger than some people, and of course there will be always people who are stronger than you. And it's just endless, the hierarchies. And I think it would be a very stupid idea to think that you are in some kind of like a fixed state of hierarchy, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think that it's I do think it's very simplistic of people on either the New Age or Christian side to chop everything up to being one or the other. Of course, there's a long history to all that, which with Christianity demonizing everything and whatnot. But it's like, I think that I think that there's a difference too between the horror or terror that the fear that a Christian would have over these things, which is like this kind of cringing God believer fear of, oh, this is so evil, where the kind of fear that we're talking about is something much deeper and, like I said, like sacred. It's sacred. It's an experience of the terrible power of the these numinous forces, right? It's a very different thing, and it does come in terror. It does come in shadows. It comes in darkness. It can be a horrific thing, all this stuff. And it's not, but it's for us. It's what we do. Like the New Age person who wants to whitewash everything is not for this path because they couldn't handle it. They want to be bathed in white light and be afraid of everything, or try to make all the gods into like little cardboard cutouts of themselves or whatever, So I think that this path is definitely for a certain type of person, right? It's not for everybody.
Definitely. And like I said before, I think this is not optional in the sense that I would have had a much happier and easier life. And I'm not bragging at all. I sometimes think about this in retrospect, that there has been like needless suffering and strife in my life, but I wouldn't kind of give it away because it has been like a part of the initiation, in the sense that I'm finally here. I finally get to reap at least some benefits of have been on this path. And I think Richard Gavin had a good explanation about the sacred horror himself. And of course, the Grandmaster himself, Rudolf Otto, the German theologian who coined the concept numinous back in the day, the 20s of the last century, I think. But anyhow, Gavin himself said that, and I hope I'm not messing up his original thought. I think I'm not. He said something that the sacred horror is not the normal kind of horror against some kind of like worldly evil or whatever, like bodily harm, of course, but it's the most strongest reaction human mind or neurology can muster up to kind of react to this kind of otherness, which is completely undefiniable, and it cannot be boxed, it cannot be categorized. Even the Canadian professor John Verbeek himself said that the numinous is something which is directly uncategorizable. I'm butchering the word here, but I think that it's just that it's impossible to have an encounter with the secretary and to not be shocked. But it's a different shock that you have probably had before. It's just unique experience. And I have to say to myself that I have mostly encountered this. The strongest encounter with the sacred horror has been in dreams, and some couple of rare instances in so-called real life. And I have been even sober when I've had that. And I'm not at all in I don't think at all that I have only had like a kind of, fraction of the whole power of the sacred horror. I'm not trying to say that I have experienced it all, but the little I have experienced from that radioactive force has been something which I revere to the end of my life, and it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely I'm a type of person that has a hunger for these types of experiences in the sense that I like to like if I could like more often I would like I'd love to go out and try to find these kind of eerie places, like in the woods or abandoned places where you can connect to this liminal state of things. Unfortunately, here in Colorado, it's primarily we don't have a lot of like abandoned places you can get to, or things like that. It's mostly in the woods. Maybe you can go to a ghost town or something. But either way, it's something like connecting with these eerie places. I think that there's something about that experience. Which is it just for some people for the average person who engages, let's say on like ghost hunting and things like this, I think it's a little bit more of a it becomes more of a rush, I guess. It becomes more of a they get addicted to the stimuli, so to say. But I do think that there's other people who are involved with things like ghost hunting, etc., who even unconsciously are genuinely I think that there's some people who don't even realize that they are very much connecting with this kind of spiritual level, right? And I think that to me, I think that doing these types of things is it is on one level exciting on a purely human level, but then on a spiritual level, it's very powerful because you're like going to these just these places, and to me, it very much ties into this idea of spectral resonance. And I do think that, like I said earlier, the more you tie into that, tap into that, and the more it transforms, and the more that anywhere that you go can start to transform into these types of haunted places, so to say.
Yeah, I think this is a very fascinating topic. I think you discussed with Nas in the previous episode you had with him. The haunted house being a kind of, the haunted house being it in itself like a genius loci. I think this is a fascinating concept. I have talked about this with my other colleagues since as well, because you made this reference to the Salem Slot, the book by Stephen King with the vampires, the house being the den of the vampires and
Yeah.
being kind of the ominous genius loci of the town, or the haunted house was that. I think if we go a little back to what we spoke in the beginning of the episode, was that certain places kind of resonate this type of spectral resonance, and I probably don't have the time to find the exact wording in Richard's spectral resonance text, but I think he said there that some places have kind of more of that than the others. And this is weird that when it comes to the liminal, I think in my early childhood, I was quite in tune with the liminal in the sense that I was kind of happily and easily living in the liminal in those kind of like attic spaces and whatnot. But during my teenage years or the late teenage years, I think I had a kind of, rift or some kind of dilemma or some kind of trauma because I had such a powerful sleep paralysis experiences when I was a child and in my teenage years, I believe. And I was getting into like an actual occultism back in the day. And I really feel like I burned my fingers severely during those like formative years. And that didn't stop me from being obsessed by the liminal, but I was basically too,
Closed off from it in a way, like
yeah,
yeah.
yes, I was perhaps too resonant, and I had some kind of maybe like a philosophical turmoil in my head because I believe I had a short period of some kind of atheism and some point whatever I was like a kind of searching my own path and still and I was maybe having a kind of a rift like Carl Jung had when he was around 20, I think, with the persona number one and the persona number two, the mystical Jung and the ordinary consensus reality interface Jung. I believe I had about with that, and I was still like almost being like a sponge to the liminal, and because of that, like I said, I believe I had a couple of very harrowing experiences, which really like. I can really say they were traumatizing. And I then kind of had this like love-hate relationship with perhaps the spectral resonance. And it was weird that even because of that, and or even in spite of that, I was continuously, burning my fingers at the stove. It's very hard to explain, but I had a difficult time back then with that. And I believe only in my later years, I kind of restored this more like a healthier or somehow like a balanced rapport with certain kinds of liminal. And I believe it only was healed the wound, the kind of liminal trauma wound when I returned to the cottage, so to speak, to be there alone with my dogs around 4 years ago. And at the beginning, it was fucking harrowing. It was like all the stuff I had kept in the back compartment, so to speak. I had to deal with, and it was like a roller coaster with the liminal, and it feels even now that the cottage and these kind of spaces are so resonant and powerful with the liminal. I sometimes need to kind of limit and keep a like this kind of working balance with them, whereas some people perhaps of not my ilk, they would directly provoke them. Yes, it feels like when I'm at consensus reality at the city apartment, it feels like I really have to provoke the liminal and do all kinds of stunts to get into the right atmosphere. But at the cottage, it's the other way around. I need to somehow to limit it in a way. If you catch my rant
Yeah.
correctly,
Yeah, and
it's weird.
I do think that one thing that is important for everything we've talked about, though, is that although I do believe that we should be really transforming ourselves, I do think you need to also be able to ground yourself as well.
Yes,
I think that it is important to demarcate boundaries of sorts in the sense that, like, we can always be connected to those forces, but we don't have to be directly engaging with them 24/7, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's important
yes,
sometimes to ground yourself, to involve yourself with things that aren't anything like that. They aren't important in that way, whatever it might be. I do think that is actually an important piece of the whole puzzle, because I do think that if we are, as you say, like being overtaken by these forces too much, it can definitely lead to a lot of problems, and
Yes.
you need to, that's part of why it's good to be doing ritual work where you go out and you do this thing and you connect with it and you demarcate the time and the place and what you're doing, and then you step away from it and you go and watch Game of Thrones or something to like kind of clear your mind. Like it's the sign of the I think it is an important part of magic, because I think sometimes if you're not clear about these things, you don't ground yourself. It's also, I think, harder to correctly follow your intuition, and also harder to correctly understand what you're communicating with in your work as well. That can be, I think, being grounded and helps you grasp what you're communicating with in a better way, if that makes sense. Because I think if you're just so like in it, like you can kind of lose sight of what's real and what's not and what's going on, and like you start to lose the boundary between you and your mind and other things. And I just think that it's important to always keep yourself grounded as well.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of like a healthy balance in the sense that like any kind of intoxicating or addictive substances, even though I don't think liminal is that kind of thing, but it's a good metaphor in the sense that if you're drinking every night like heavy amounts of alcohol, it doesn't do good for you, And then again, if you are not having any kind of like intoxication from time to time, or kind of like ecstatic or cathartic release, that's also bad for you. So I think it's the balance. Actually, I could recite a recount of my original actual thing which created this kind of rift to me when I was probably 9 years old, because I started to have this recurring nightmare, which only later, say around 25 years later, I understood that it was actually early childhood bouts of sleep paralysis. I just recite this dream which I wrote in the story mode like a couple of years ago, and I just understood a few years ago what this whole fucking dream was about, and it really kind of was like a knockout for me. Anyhow, it went like this. The other. I am 9, captured in a lucid dream, a meadow radiant with sunlight, where a blend of lavender and sunflowers create an aromatic panorama. The air itself seems to have a flavor, almost saccharine like honey. Amid the idyllic scenery, my eyes fixate on the discrepancy. A single, dark, thick hair anchored in the earth. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, my fingers grasp it, uprooting it as I pulled the stopper from a cosmic sink. The moment the hair dislodges, the earth shudders and groans, collapsing inward to form an unnatural sinkhole, a gaping rift in the very fabric of my dream world. No longer just a force, gravity becomes an animate entity, yanking me in with an insatiable need. My fall evolves into an intricate descent through layers of esoteric dimensions and fractal realities that constantly shift and react as though repelled by my presence. Time dilates, elongating each moment into an eternal whirlpool of disorienting chaos. Upon arrival, the chamber I find myself in doesn't break the silence as much as it alters the ambience. An unlit void where light is an impossibility, navigable only through touch and lingering primordial aroma. At this subterranean nexus, an unseen altar calls out, emanating an aura of psychic energy. Resting upon it is an object both repellent and compelling, an enigmatic chrysalis stretching nearly a meter in length and half as wide. It emits an uncanny vitality, simultaneously insect like and otherworldly, as though lying in wait for this very moment of unveiling. As I step closer, the atmosphere thickens with an invisible current, a mental resonance that penetrates my core. I am your creator. The realization blooms within my thoughts, less as a language and more as an intrinsic understanding. Emerging from the dream doesn't sever the connection, rather, it transmutes the experience. The mattress beneath me shudders and distorts, resembling a bed of writhing bristles. My body remains inert, imprisoned by an invisible force field. Each inhalation grows outwards as the room starts to fragment in my field of vision, severing my grasp on reality. At last, after what feels like a geological age, a surge of adrenaline restores my mobility and I crash onto the floor. My parents appear, their faces blurred sketches, vaguely familiar yet altered in some fundamental way. This dream, recurring and relentless, plants the seed of existential questioning within me, a mystery that only begins to resolve 3 decades later. Over the years, I come to understand that I am the perennial outsider, and this alien entity was no mere figment of my imagination, but the progenitor of my ilk, an ancestral cipher drawing me into a lifelong catabasis for the other.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a crazy dream and vision.
Yes, it was. I just, like I said, understood like a couple of years ago the true meaning of this thing, and it really haunted me for years and years. And I think that was the pivotal moment which really made me who I'm today. I think this is a good background information for all the people who have been listening to my ratings here.
Yeah, I think it's very appropriate for everything we're talking about. And I think for the next time next conversation we have, I think if we start off from where we left off here with the haunted houses and things like this, and we even from there might be a good spot, because I think that we don't have necessary time to get into all of that, but I think that would be a very interesting conversation to do.
Yes.
But yeah, I think this vision is a good way to close out the episode, because I think let people think upon what what that was.
Yes. It kind of epitomizes for at least one person's case this kind of like an early nascent experience which controls your compass even when you are middle aged like I am now.
Yeah, the things that called us to this path, even as an adolescent or a child, still have that power now. And will always do, as long as you're being true to yourself. I think it's really what it comes down to is being true to who you are and what you're called to be. And where you're called to go with your spiritual development.
The other is the true north for me.
Yeah, and the roots of the whole thing were, I think, always found in our childhood. They're there. The things that stay constant from childhood all the way to now are generally the things that tie into the most essential parts of your personality, in my opinion.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's been another very powerful conversation. I think this was one of our best ones yet. So
yes,
we just keep getting stronger with these conversations, which is great.
Dig deeper.
Yeah, and we'll do another one before not too long. Anything else you want to talk about before we close out?
You can view them or listen or watch this theater in our Gates Collective's YouTube channel. It was narrated by the Dr. Martin Locker, and he is an expert voice talent, and it's illustrated, the story, if you want to hear it again without me butchering my English, because I'm not a native speaker, obviously.
Yeah, and then of course if they follow you on social media, they can see some of the pictures of the pit, and I think you posted like a video that you sent me that
Yes,
of it
about
and,
the
yeah.
Necromantheon. Yes.
Yeah, so people can go and have a look and of what you're doing, and yeah, I think what would be incredible is if at some point you could do what's his name, Gas Boucher, or I think
Yes,
yeah,
the Swiss artist.
yeah, the Anarch book. It'd be great if you could eventually publish a book of pictures and essays centered around the pit. I think these images that you take and you create in the pit are very, very impressive for me, very powerful.
Actually, Gust's work has been a major influence for me from the early this year, and I appreciate his work and philosophy. And this is something I have been thinking about since I read the magnificent book, The Anarch, and to do something like that with the pit, to have this kind of book artifact. And I have been gathering the information and taking photographs, and there is a page for the pit at the Tuonen Portti Collective's website. So it's beginning.
Yeah,
It's beginning for the project.
Yeah, I think that'd be amazing to have a book with essays and stories, horror, short stories you write that are horror, that connect to this stuff, and all your essays you write about these subjects and interspersed with all these pictures of the pit, and I think there'd be an account of the pit. Like, I just think it'd be very cool to have a actual physical artifact as a book about this subject. So
yeah, maybe when the pit turns 10 years old, the project, and maybe I'll get something out by then. I hope.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Appreciate you, Konstantin, and thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thank you, and have a good night.
You too.